So our next step is going to be working with that checkbox. We want to listen for whether it's checked or unchecked and know when to cross off the to-do list item. So in this case, our checkbox was dynamically created. When the page loaded, there was no existing checkbox on the page. So to make this easier, let's go ahead and just add in a class here so we can target this element more easily. So we can just go ahead and give this a class called checkbox. So now we have that. We know that is going to be our next selector. And let's go ahead and do our class checkbox here. Now, what is the event that we are waiting for here? Let's go back into the documentation and look at some of the form events. So back in the documentation, let's go back down to the events section. And we have a lot of options here once again, but in this case, let's go to our form events. These are the events most commonly used on forums. And there are a lot of options as always, but what we're going to do in this case is listen for whether the value of the checkbox actually changes. So click could work in this case. We want to listen for whether that element is clicked or not. But a safer way is determining whether that value actually changed. So let's go ahead and take this function here. Going back into our code, we want to listen for whether this change event has happened. So as we're testing out a new event, let's go ahead and use our console.log. And we're going to console.log checkbox checked. And let's just go and confirm that when our checkbox is actually checked, that this is being logged to the console. So going back into our code here, we need a new item, our item. And let's go ahead and open our console. Going to the DevTools and to the console tab here. And let's go ahead and check this item off and see if our message is logged to the console. So nothing happened. Let's discuss why that's the case. So going back to some information we learned earlier, just to point out, we had wrapped this all of our JavaScript code in this document.ready function. So initially, when our page loaded and the document, or DOM, was ready, we went ahead and loaded this code. Well, at that point, this checkbox here didn't exist. That was created dynamically. So when we are referring to the document here, this document doesn't know of a checkbox. So how are we going to target a dynamically created element? So in this case, instead of selecting our actual element itself, we need to select the entire document because we want to basically take a reading as to what the DOM looks like now. So here we can go ahead and comment out our old code that was unsuccessful, and let's target the entire document. So now, instead of just looking for this checkbox item, it's going to look for the current DOM. So now that we're here, we're going to have to approach this problem a little bit differently. So the change method would have been really useful in this case, but we can't access the element that we needed. So now we have the whole document at our disposal, and we're going to have to dig a little bit deeper. So that change method, behind the scenes, it's really a variation of a method called on. And on is basically targeting any of the events that can exist in the browser. So this on would have worked for passing in click when we listened for the click event earlier. And in this case, we're actually going to listen for the change event. And on this change event, we're actually going to execute code. So in addition to passing in the event name, we have the entire document here. We can also pass in the element that we want to target. And now since we have our up-to-date document, our up-to-date DOM, and it has the checkbox items, we can actually target that now. So let's go ahead and target our checkbox. And then just as before, we want to pass in our handler. What do we want to happen when this element with the class of checkbox changes? So we're going to go ahead and pass this in here. And this is the way we're going to have to target our dynamically created elements. Because they didn't exist when the DOM was initially loaded, we can't access them unless we get our up-to-date DOM and listen for the events using the on method. So, are you with me?